The manila envelope landed on my desk with a soft thud, breaking the monotony of another rainy Tuesday morning in downtown Chicago. Sarah Chen, my assistant, stood there with her characteristic half-smile that usually meant trouble. "New case just came in, Thomas. They're paying triple our usual rate, and they want you specifically." I raised an eyebrow, pushing aside the stack of divorce cases I'd been avoiding. After 15 years as a private investigator, I'd learned that anything paying triple usually meant triple the headache. But rent doesn't pay itself, especially not in this part of town. "What's the story?" I asked, reaching for the envelope. "Missing person. Robert Maxwell, CEO of Maxwell Development Group. His wife says he vanished 3 weeks ago. No ransom demands, no body, just, gone." Sarah's words hung in the air like smoke. I froze, my hand hovering over the envelope. Maxwell. The name hit me like a punch to the gut, sending me back 20 years to shouting matches in our living room, my mother's tears, and my father's increasingly desperate explanations. Robert Maxwell wasn't just any missing CEO, he was the man who'd nearly destroyed my family. "You okay, boss?" Sarah's voice snapped me back to reality. She didn't know about Maxwell, couldn't know. I'd buried that history so deep even Google would have trouble finding it. "Yeah, just thinking." I opened the envelope, pretending my hands weren't shaking. Inside was the standard missing person paperwork, along with a recent photo of Maxwell. He'd aged well, damn him. Still had that same smug smile that I remembered from the newspaper clippings my mother kept in a box in our attic. "His wife's waiting in the conference room," Sarah added. "Says she won't leave until she talks to you personally." I stood up, straightening my tie. "How much does she know about me?" "Just your reputation. Been asking around about the best PI in Chicago for finding missing executives. Your name kept coming up." Perfect. She didn't know about the connection. Maybe that was for the better. I grabbed my recorder and notepad, professional habits kicking in despite the storm brewing in my gut. The conference room door felt heavier than usual as I pushed it open. Miranda Maxwell sat there, elegant in a way that spoke of old money and private school education. She looked nothing like the society page photos I'd secretly studied years ago, trying to understand the man who'd partnered with my father. "Mrs. Maxwell," I said, extending my hand. "I'm Thomas Sullivan." She took my hand, her grip surprisingly firm. "Thank you for seeing me, Mr. Sullivan. I assume your assistant briefed you." She did. 3 weeks missing, no ransom demands. Have the police been involved? Miranda's perfectly manicured nails tapped against the mahogany table. They've been less than helpful. They seem convinced Robert just ran off with some younger woman or took an unannounced vacation. They don't know him like I do. I settled into my chair, clicking my pen. And how well do you know him, Mrs. Maxwell? Her eyes narrowed slightly. 25 years of marriage. I know when something's wrong. Robert would never just disappear, not with the merger coming up. It's what he's been working toward for the past decade. Merger. The word echoed in my head, reminding me of similar conversations overheard through thin walls years ago. Maxwell Development Group was always chasing the next big deal, the next merger, the next opportunity to climb higher, usually over the backs of others. "Tell me about the last time you saw him," I said, forcing myself to focus on the present. What followed was a detailed account of a normal Tuesday morning. Coffee together on their penthouse balcony. A kiss goodbye. Robert heading to a meeting with investors he wouldn't name. Then nothing. No calls, no texts, no trace. As Miranda spoke, I took notes mechanically, but my mind was racing. The timing was too perfect. Maxwell disappears just as another major merger is approaching. History repeating itself, or something else? "One last question," I said as Miranda finished her account. "Has anyone unusual been asking about Robert lately?" Old business partners, maybe? She hesitated, just for a moment. Not that I've noticed. Though, his behavior did change about a month ago. Late-night phone calls. Meetings he wouldn't discuss. I assumed it was merger-related stress. I nodded, closing my notebook. I'll take the case, Mrs. Maxwell. My standard contract requires a 50% retainer up front. She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a check. I've already taken the liberty. Your assistant mentioned the amount. As I walked her out, Sarah caught my eye from her desk, giving me a questioning look. I waited until Miranda was safely in the elevator before returning to my office and closing the door. Sitting at my desk, I stared at the check in my hand. The amount was substantial enough to keep my agency running for months. But that wasn't what held my attention. It was the signature, flowing, confident, almost arrogant. Just like Robert Maxwell himself. I opened my bottom drawer and pulled out an old photo, worn at the edges. Two men stood in front of a construction site, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning at the camera. My father and Robert Maxwell, back when they were still partners, before everything fell apart. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Heard you took the Maxwell case. Be careful what you dig up. Some graves should stay buried. I looked at the photo again, then at the text. Whatever happened to Maxwell, I had a feeling this case was about to open old wounds that had never really healed. The next morning, I found myself parked outside Maxwell Development Group's gleaming headquarters, watching employees stream through the revolving doors. 20 years ago, this building had been my father's dream too. Now it stood as a monument to broken promises and betrayed trust. I adjusted my tie and grabbed my briefcase, playing the part of just another business consultant. The security guard barely glanced at my forged visitor's pass, amazing what old contacts could still provide. The elevator ride to the executive floor gave me time to settle into character. Maxwell's corner office was exactly what you'd expect, all floor-to-ceiling windows and expensive modernist furniture. His executive assistant, a sharp-featured man named James Crawford, watched me like a hawk as I examined the space. As I mentioned, Mr. Sullivan, Mr. Maxwell hasn't used his office in nearly a month. Crawford's voice carried a hint of condescension. The police have already been through everything. I ran my finger along the desktop, noting the lack of dust. Someone's been keeping it clean. Standard procedure. We have appearances to maintain. I moved to the windows, taking in the view of Chicago's skyline. Tell me about his behavior before he disappeared. Any unusual visitors? Late nights? Crawford's reflection in the glass showed a flicker of something. Mr. Maxwell always worked late. As for visitors. He paused, choosing his words carefully. There was one gentleman, about 3 weeks before the disappearance. They argued. Loudly. Did you catch a name? No, but. Crawford lowered his voice. He mentioned something about paying old debts. Mr. Maxwell was shaken afterward. Asked me to clear his schedule for the rest of the day. Old debts. The phrase sent a chill down my spine. I'd heard those exact words from my father years ago, pacing in our kitchen late at night, phone pressed to his ear. My examination of the office revealed little else of note, but something felt off. The desk was too clean, the papers too perfectly arranged. This wasn't a workspace that had been abandoned, it had been sanitized. Back in my car, I called Sarah. Need you to run a deep background check on James Crawford. Something about him isn't sitting right. On it. By the way, you got another message from that unknown number while you were out. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. What did it say? Ask your father about March 15, 2004. Mean anything to you? March 15, 2004. The date was burned into my memory, the day my father attempted suicide. The day after Maxwell announced the merger that would leave Sullivan Construction in ruins. "Yeah," I said, starting the car. "It means someone knows way too much about this case." I spent the afternoon digging through old newspaper archives at the library. The official story was simple enough: Maxwell Development Group had absorbed Sullivan Construction in a hostile takeover, leaving my father with nothing but debt and broken dreams. But buried in the financial pages, I found something interesting: a series of suspicious transfers just before the merger, all leading to an offshore account. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was Miranda Maxwell. "Mr. Sullivan, something's happened. I found blood in our garage. A lot of it. Hidden behind some boxes." I was already heading for my car. "Don't touch anything. I'll be there in 20 minutes. The Maxwell penthouse occupied the top 2 floors of a luxury high-rise overlooking Lake Michigan. Miranda met me in the garage, her usual composure cracking around the edges. She led me to a corner behind a stack of storage containers. The blood had soaked into the concrete, creating a dark stain roughly 3 feet in diameter. Someone had tried to clean it, but they'd done a poor job. "This wasn't here 2 days ago," Miranda said, hugging herself. "I'm sure of it." I crouched down, examining the stain. "How often do you come down here?" "Almost never. We have a driver." "I only came down because..." She hesitated. "Because I got a note telling me to look here." I stood up slowly. "A note? Like a text message from an unknown number?" Her eyes widened. "How did you know?" Before I could answer, my phone rang. Sarah, with the background check results. "Thomas, you need to hear this," she said without preamble. "James Crawford. He doesn't exist. At least, not before 5 years ago. The entire work history on his resume is fabricated." I looked at the blood stain, then at Miranda's frightened face. "Sarah, call Detective Rodriguez. Tell him we need forensics at the Maxwell penthouse garage. And then start digging into any connection between Crawford and my father's old company." "Your father's company?" Miranda's voice was sharp. "What does that have to do with anything?" I turned to face her, weighing my next words carefully. The truth would come out eventually, it always did. But before I could speak, a security alarm began blaring throughout the garage. "Fire alarm," Miranda said, but I was already moving, pushing her toward the exit. I'd seen too many accidents in my line of work to believe in coincidences. We made it to the stairwell just as the sprinklers activated. Through the pounding water, I heard footsteps above us, moving fast. Someone else was in the garage. "Run," I whispered to Miranda, drawing my gun. "Get to the lobby. Don't stop for anything." She hesitated for just a moment, then disappeared down the stairs. I turned back toward the garage, water soaking through my suit. Someone had tried very hard to destroy evidence of what happened here. Now they were back to finish the job. The footsteps were getting closer. I pressed myself against the wall, waiting. Whoever was up there, they might have answers about Maxwell's disappearance. About the mysterious texts. About that day in 2004. The door above me creaked open. I held my breath, finger on the trigger. One way or another, I was about to learn some truth, and I had a feeling I wasn't going to like it. The figure that emerged from the stairwell wasn't what I expected. Instead of a professional cleaner or hired muscle, I found myself face to face with Linda Maxwell, Robert's daughter from his first marriage. I'd recognize her anywhere, though the last time I'd seen her, we were both teenagers at company picnics. "Thomas Sullivan," she said, lowering her own weapon. "I should have known you'd be involved." I kept my gun trained on her. "Funny place for a family reunion. Want to explain why you're sneaking around your father's garage during a fire alarm?" "Same reason you are, I imagine." Her smile was bitter. following breadcrumbs. Tell me, does Miranda know about your connection to my father? About what happened between him and your dad? Put the gun down, Linda. We can talk about old times later. She complied slowly, those familiar Maxwell eyes never leaving mine. I've been investigating too, Thomas. For longer than you. Want to know what I found? The sprinklers had stopped, leaving us standing in puddles of water. Distant sirens suggested the fire department was on its way. We didn't have much time. Talk fast, I said, lowering my weapon but keeping it ready. Dad was scared. Really scared. Started moving money around, setting up new accounts. Called his lawyer 4 times the day before he disappeared. She pulled out her phone, showing me banking records. But here's the interesting part, he made a huge transfer to an account registered to Sullivan Holdings. My blood ran cold. Sullivan Holdings was my father's new company, started after he rebuilt his life from scratch. When? 2 days before he vanished. $10 million. She watched my reaction carefully. Your father never mentioned it. I haven't spoken to my father in years. You know that. Right. The prodigal son who chose law enforcement over the family business. She stepped closer, water dripping from her designer coat. But you're involved now, whether you like it or not. That blood back there. It's not my father's. DNA won't match. It's staged, just like everything else about his disappearance. I processed this information, pieces starting to fit together. How do you know so much about this? Because I helped him plan it. The confession hung in the air between us. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed, another text from the unknown number, ask Linda about the safe deposit box. She has the key you need. Linda's face paled when I showed her the message. How? Who's sending those? You tell me. You're the one with all the answers. She shook her head, suddenly looking vulnerable. Not all of them. I don't know where Dad is now. He deviated from the plan 3 weeks ago. Something spooked him. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a key. But I do know about this. Come with me, Thomas. There's something you need to see. The key led us to a bank downtown, one of those old institutions with marble columns and armed guards. Linda's hands shook as she opened the safe deposit box. Inside was a single USB drive and a letter addressed to me. He left instructions, Linda explained. If he disappeared for more than 2 weeks, I was supposed to find you. Give you this. Said you were the only one he could trust to handle it right. Why me? After everything that happened? Read the letter. Maybe you'll understand. She turned to leave, then paused. Thomas? Whatever you find, remember that sometimes people do terrible things for the right reasons. Back at my office, I stared at the sealed envelope. Sarah had gone home hours ago, leaving me alone with the ghosts of the past. Finally, I broke the seal and began to read. Dear Thomas. If you're reading this, I've either succeeded in exposing the truth or I'm dead. Probably both. What happened to your father in 2004 wasn't what you think. I didn't betray him, I was trying to save him. We discovered something big enough to get us both killed. The merger, the bankruptcy, all of it was cover for something much worse. Your father agreed to take the fall to protect you and your mother. The suicide attempt was staged to make it convincing. He's been working with me ever since, trying to gather enough evidence to bring down the real criminals. The USB drive contains everything we've collected over the past 20 years. Bank records. Photographs. Names of corrupt judges and politicians. But more importantly, it contains the truth about what's happening now. They're going to try it again, Thomas. Another merger. Another suicide. More families destroyed. I know I have no right to ask anything of you. But you're a good man, a better man than your father or I ever were. You'll know what to do with this information. Watch out for Crawford. He's not what he seems. And Thomas? I'm sorry. For everything. Robert Maxwell. I sat back, letting the letter fall to my desk. My father wasn't a victim, he was a willing participant. All these years of anger, of blame, had been based on a lie. But why come clean now? What was so dangerous about this new merger? The USB drive felt heavy in my hand. Before I could plug it in, my office door opened. Sarah stood there, looking pale. Thomas? Your father's here. Says it's urgent. Behind her stood William Sullivan, my father, looking every bit as haunted as the last time I'd seen him. Our eyes met, 2 decades of unspoken words passing between us. Hello, son, he said quietly. We need to talk about Robert Maxwell. And about what really happened that night in March. The office felt too small with my father in it. Sarah quietly closed the door behind her, leaving us alone with 20 years of silence between us. He looked older than I remembered, his once commanding presence diminished by time and whatever weight he'd been carrying. You got Maxwell's letter, he said. Not a question. I held up the USB drive. And this. Want to tell me what's on it before I look? He sank into the chair across from my desk, rubbing his face with weathered hands. Evidence. Enough to bring down half the city's power brokers. Real estate fraud, money laundering, murder, all of it connected to the Maxwell Development Group's board of directors. But not to Maxwell himself. Robert was like me, caught in something bigger than ourselves. By the time we realized what was happening, we were in too deep. He leaned forward, eyes pleading. The suicide attempt wasn't just for show, son. I really was going to do it. Robert stopped me, convinced me we could make it right. I thought of all the nights I'd laid awake, hating him for his weakness, for letting Maxwell destroy our family. 20 years, Dad. 20 years of letting me believe you were the victim. We were protecting you. If they thought you knew anything. Who's they? Before he could answer, my phone rang. Miranda Maxwell's number. Thomas? They're here. In my house. They're looking for something and, oh God. Her voice cut off abruptly. I was already moving, grabbing my gun. Call the police, I told my father. Tell them to get to the Maxwell penthouse. Now. The drive to Miranda's building was a blur of red lights and squealing tires. I called Linda on the way, but got voicemail. Sarah texted that she was coordinating with the police, but they were delayed by a pileup on Lake Shore Drive. The penthouse lobby was deserted, never a good sign. The security desk showed signs of a struggle, monitors dark. I took the service elevator, weapon drawn. The elevator doors opened to chaos. The penthouse had been ransacked, furniture overturned, artwork slashed. And there, in the middle of the living room, stood James Crawford, holding Miranda at gunpoint. Mr. Sullivan, he said pleasantly. Right on time. Where's the drive? I kept my gun trained on him, assessing options. Miranda's eye was swollen, blood trickling from her lip. But she was standing straight, defiant. Let her go, Crawford. Whatever they're paying you, it's not worth it. His laugh was cold. Payment? This isn't about money, Sullivan. This is about power. Control. The same thing it's always been about. He pressed the gun harder against Miranda's temple. The drive. Now. You mean this one? A new voice. Linda Maxwell stepped out from the hallway, another USB drive in her hand. The one with all Daddy's dirty secrets. Crawford's eyes narrowed. There were 2 drives. Insurance policy, Linda said, her own weapon appearing. Dad didn't trust easily. Especially after what happened to Thomas's father. I kept my focus on Crawford, but my mind was racing. 2 drives. Maxwell had created a backup, given it to his daughter. But why show it now? Linda, I said carefully, whatever you're thinking. I'm thinking it's time everyone knew the truth. About the merger. About what really happened to my father. She tossed the drive to Crawford. Go ahead. Look at it. See what 20 years of guilt does to a man. Crawford caught the drive one-handed, never lowering his weapon from Miranda's head. He smiled, a predator's smile. You're as naive as your father. Did you really think we wouldn't have backups of our own? Documents showing exactly how Robert Maxwell and William Sullivan embezzled millions. Evidence of their crimes. You mean the evidence you fabricated? My father's voice rang out from behind me. He stepped off the elevator, looking more alive than I'd seen him in years. The same evidence Robert and I have spent 20 years disproving. Crawford's composure cracked, just for a moment. It was enough. Miranda drove her elbow back into his solar plexus, dropping to the floor as Linda and I both fired. Crawford went down hard, his shot going wide. I rushed to secure his weapon while Linda covered him. Miranda scrambled away, my father helping her up. Police are on their way up, my father said. Along with some very interested FBI agents. Crawford laughed through bloody teeth. You think this ends with me? The board will never let this get out. They'll bury all of you, just like they buried Maxwell. Robert's dead. Miranda's voice broke. No, Linda said, her gun never wavering. He's in witness protection. Has been for 3 weeks. Today was supposed to be the final piece, getting both drives to the FBI. Proof of the board's corruption, and proof of their attempts to frame him and William Sullivan. I looked at my father. You knew. This whole time. He nodded slowly. Robert reached out last month. Said they were finally ready to move. But someone tipped off the board. They tried to grab him, but the FBI got him out just in time. Everything since then, the disappearance, the blood, even Miranda's call tonight, it was all orchestrated to draw them out. Miranda stared at Linda. You knew your father was alive. Let me believe. I'm sorry, Linda said softly. We needed your reactions to be genuine. They were watching you too closely. Sirens filled the air outside. Crawford's smile widened. You really think you've won? The board has judges in their pocket, prosecutors on their payroll. In 24 hours, I'll be out, and all of you. A new voice cut through the room. I wouldn't be so sure about that. Robert Maxwell stepped off the elevator, flanked by FBI agents. He looked tired but very much alive. Hello, James. We need to talk about March 15, 2004. As the agents moved to secure Crawford, I watched 20 years of secrets begin to unravel. But one question still nagged at me: who had been sending those anonymous texts, leading us all to this moment? I caught Linda's eye across the room. She gave me a slight nod, then turned away, deleting messages from her phone. The next 24 hours passed in a blur of FBI interviews and revelations. I sat in my office, examining the contents of both USB drives displayed across my dual monitors. The story they told was worse than anything I'd imagined. Sarah placed a fresh coffee on my desk, then settled into her chair. Your father's here again. And Linda Maxwell. They're waiting in the conference room. I rubbed my eyes, struggling to process everything I'd learned. The drives contained more than just evidence of corruption. They revealed a systematic destruction of families, businesses, and lives, all orchestrated by Maxwell Development Group's board of directors. Did you know? I asked Sarah. About Linda sending those texts. She shook her head. Not until last night. She needed someone on the inside, keeping track of your investigation. Asked me to help after your father contacted her. Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Sarah's impeccable timing, her convenient discoveries, she'd been part of the plan all along. I should have felt betrayed, but all I felt was tired. The conference room was eerily similar to the day Miranda Maxwell first walked in, except now it held the architects of an elaborate scheme 2 decades in the making. My father sat next to Linda, both looking exhausted but relieved. "The FBI's moving against the board tonight," Linda said as I sat down. "Simultaneous arrests across 3 states. Dad's testimony, combined with the drives." She smiled grimly. "They won't wiggle out of this one." "Why all the games?" I asked. "The texts, the blood, the staged disappearance, why not just take the evidence to the FBI directly?" My father leaned forward. "Because we needed to force them into the open. Make them sloppy. The board had too many safeguards, too many contingencies. We had to make them think they were winning. By using me." The bitterness in my voice surprised even me. "By using Miranda." "By using everyone," Linda corrected. "Including ourselves. The only way to sell it was if everyone's reactions were genuine. Even Dad didn't know all the details of our plan." I pulled out my phone, scrolling through the mysterious texts. March 15, 2004. The day everything changed. "Tell me what really happened." My father's face aged 10 years in an instant. I discovered what the board was really doing with their development projects. They weren't just pushing out small businesses, they were destroying evidence. Every project, every merger, covered up something darker. Human trafficking. Money laundering. Murder. Robert found out they were using his company as a front, Linda continued. He tried to gather evidence, but they caught wind of it. Threatened his family, threatened me. So he reached out to your father. The suicide attempt was supposed to be our way out, my father said quietly. Make them think they'd won, that we were broken. Give us space to work without them watching. But it cost us everything else. He looked at me, eyes glistening. Including you. Sarah appeared at the door. "Thomas? There's something you need to see." She led us to my office, where my computer screens displayed a new email. The sender was James Crawford. "It came through an encrypted channel," Sarah explained. "He must have set it to send automatically if he was arrested." The email contained a single video file. In it, Crawford sat at a desk, smirking at the camera. "By now, you think you've won," he began. "Robert Maxwell's dramatic return, the FBI raids, the perfect resolution to 20 years of mystery. But you forgot one thing, we always have a contingency plan." The video cut to security footage of a warehouse. The timestamp showed it was from 3 hours ago. Inside, men in suits were loading crates into a shipping container. "Everything you think you found, everything you think you know, it's just the surface. For every corrupt judge we bought, every business we destroyed, there are 10 more you don't know about. And right now, all that evidence is disappearing." Linda was already on her phone, relaying the warehouse location to the FBI. But Crawford's smug voice continued. "Oh, and Thomas? Ask your father about Project Inheritance. Ask him what really happened to your mother's family fortune. Some betrayals run deeper than others." The video ended. All eyes turned to my father, who had gone deathly pale. "Dad?" My voice sounded strange, distant. "What's Project Inheritance?" He sank into a chair, the weight of another secret crushing him. "Your mother, when she died last year, she never knew. I couldn't tell her. The board, they didn't just threaten our business. They found out about her inheritance, the trust fund she never knew she had. They gave me a choice, help them bury the evidence of their crimes, or watch them destroy both you and her." Linda's phone buzzed. She checked it, her expression darkening. FBI just reached the warehouse. Everything's gone. They cleaned it out completely. Sarah was typing furiously at her computer. The shipping container's manifest, it's registered to a company in Shanghai. It left port 20 minutes ago. I stared at the empty warehouse on my screen, thinking about choices and consequences. About a young man who'd spent 20 years hating his father for a betrayal that was actually a sacrifice. We need to stop that shipment, I said finally. And we need to find out what else Crawford wasn't telling us. Linda nodded. I have contacts in Shanghai. People who owe my father favors. If we move fast. No more games, I cut her off. No more manipulation. From now on, we work together. Everything on the table. My father stood, straightening his shoulders. Crawford mentioned other operations we don't know about. Other families they've destroyed. This isn't over. No, I agreed, watching the cargo ship's tracker move slowly across my screen. This is just the beginning. Sarah cleared her throat. Thomas? There's something else. While you were all watching the video, I was running facial recognition on the men in the warehouse. One of them, it was Judge Harrison. The same judge who's supposed to sign the arrest warrants for the board members tonight. The room fell silent as implications sank in. The board's influence reached higher than anyone had imagined. And somewhere in Shanghai, a shipping container full of evidence was racing away from justice. Linda's phone rang, Robert Maxwell. As she answered it, I caught my father's eye. 20 years of lies and mistrust hung between us, but something else too, a chance to make things right. Dad, I said quietly, tell me everything you know about Judge Harrison. Every detail. It's time to finish this. He nodded, pulling out an old notebook from his jacket. It started in 1999, with a series of property deals along the river. Judge Harrison's chambers felt like a tomb. The mahogany panels and leather-bound law books that had once projected authority now seemed like props in an elaborate charade. The judge himself sat behind his massive desk, his normally imperious demeanor cracking under the weight of the evidence we'd just presented. You understand what happens next, I said, closing my laptop. The video we'd shown him, surveillance footage of his multiple meetings with Crawford over the years, had done its work. They'll kill me if I talk. His voice trembled. Not so mighty now. Linda leaned forward, her voice ice-cold. They'll kill you if you don't. The board doesn't leave loose ends. Just ask James Crawford. Oh wait, you can't. He had an unfortunate accident in his cell an hour ago. I watched the color drain from Harrison's face. Crawford's death wasn't an accident, of course. The board was cleaning house, just as we'd predicted. Just as we'd counted on. We can protect you, my father said from his position by the door. But we need those warrants signed. Now. Harrison's pen shook as he signed the stack of arrest warrants. Each signature another nail in the board's coffin. 20 years of corruption, about to come crashing down. My phone buzzed, a text from Sarah, Shanghai contact came through. Container located. Local authorities moving in. Everything was falling into place. While the board focused on eliminating loose ends like Crawford, they'd missed the bigger picture. Linda's contacts in Shanghai weren't just there to track the container, they were there to swap it. Right now, the real evidence was on its way back to Chicago, while the board's cleanup crew would find nothing but empty crates. One last thing, I said to Harrison. Project Inheritance. All the files. Where are they? He opened his desk drawer with trembling hands, removing a thick folder. Everything's here. The original trust documents, the transfers, the threats they used. I kept copies. Insurance. I took the folder, thinking of my mother. She died never knowing about her lost inheritance, never understanding the true cost of our family's fall from grace. Some wounds would never fully heal. Linda's phone lit up, Robert Maxwell calling. She put it on speaker. FBI just finished the raids, Robert's voice filled the room. 14 board members in custody. But Thomas. He paused. Victor Chen got away. He's gone dark. Victor Chen. The board's chairman, the architect of their decades-long criminal enterprise. The man who'd personally threatened my father that night in 2004. He'll head for the private airfield, my father said. It's what I would have done. He keeps a jet fueled and ready. Already covered, Linda replied. Miranda's been watching the airfield since this morning. She just spotted him arriving. I looked at my father, seeing not the broken man of my childhood memories, but a warrior who'd sacrificed everything to protect his family. Ready for one last fight, Dad? He checked his gun, a glimmer of the old fire in his eyes. Let's finish this. The private airfield was a small facility north of the city. Chen's black Mercedes was parked haphazardly near his private hangar, its driver's door still open. Miranda's text had come just in time. We found Chen in the hangar, preparing to board his Gulfstream. He turned as we entered, his expensive suit immaculate, his smile unchanged from the company photos I'd studied. The prodigal son, he said, looking at me. And the failed father. How fitting. He glanced at his watch. Come to arrest me? You're too late. In 10 minutes, I'll be in international airspace. In 24 hours, every shred of evidence you think you have will be inadmissible or destroyed. You're not flying anywhere, Linda emerged from behind the jet, weapon drawn. She'd slipped in through the back while we distracted him. It's over, Victor. His smile widened. My dear, nothing's ever over. Your father taught you that. Power doesn't disappear, it merely changes hands. He reached slowly into his jacket. The question is, what will you do with it? Don't, I warned, raising my gun. He pulled out a thumb drive. 20 years of dirt on every major player in Chicago. Judges, politicians, business leaders, enough to control this city for a generation. It could be yours. All of yours. Isn't that what this was always about? Regaining what you lost? I felt the weight of the past 20 years, the anger, the betrayal, the loss. Chen was offering us everything we'd fought for, power, control, revenge. You're wrong, my father said quietly. This was never about power. It was about justice. Chen's smile faltered as FBI agents emerged from every corner of the hangar, weapons trained on him. Robert Maxwell stepped forward, looking remarkably alive for a dead man. Hello, Victor. Remember when you told me power doesn't disappear? You were right. He nodded to the agents. It just found its way home. As they led Chen away, I turned to my father. Mom's inheritance will be restored, he finished. Along with everything else they stole. It won't bring back the years we lost, but... No, I agreed. But it's a start. Later that night, I sat in my office, staring at the photo of my father and Robert Maxwell from all those years ago. Linda knocked on the doorframe. Quite a story, she said, sitting down. Think anyone will believe it? I thought about the headlines that would run tomorrow, about the lives that would be changed. Truth is stranger than fiction. Speaking of truth. She slid a phone across my desk, the one she'd used to send those anonymous texts. Sometimes people need a push to find it. I picked up the phone, thinking of all the ways she'd manipulated events, all the strings she'd pulled. No more games, remember? She smiled, standing to leave. Life is a game, Thomas. The trick is knowing when to change the rules. At the door, she paused. By the way, Dad's reorganizing the company. He'll need good people he can trust. People who understand the value of both justice and mercy. I looked at the photo again, at those two young men full of dreams and ambition. Tell him I'll think about it. After she left, I called my father. We had 20 years of conversations to catch up on, and this time, there would be no lies between us. The city lights twinkled outside my window, each one representing a story, a life, a potential for both corruption and redemption. Somewhere out there, other powerful men were making the same choices Chen had made, destroying lives for profit and power. But tonight, at least, justice had won. And tomorrow? Tomorrow was another case, another chance to make things right. I picked up my phone and dialed Sarah's number. Get some rest, I told her. Tomorrow, we're back to work. The regular kind. No more conspiracies, she asked, amusement in her voice. No promises, I replied, thinking of Linda's job offer. But at least no more anonymous texts. After hanging up, I opened my drawer and looked at the old photo one last time before putting it away. Some wounds would never fully heal, but some bridges could be rebuilt. It was time to start building.